The morning of January 15th, 1943. Kummersdorf Proving Ground, 25 kilometers south of Berlin. The frost clung to everything, the barbed wire, the concrete bunkers, the skeletal trees of the Brandenburg forest. Inside, a low building marked only by the Black Eagle of the Reich, a team of Wehrmacht engineers gathered around a steel examination table. The object before them was unremarkable in appearance, scratched, mud-caked, its wooden stock scarred by combat. Yet this captured American weapon would force Germany's finest ordnance minds to confront an uncomfortable truth about modern warfare. Oberingenieur Klaus Werner lifted the Thompson submachine gun carefully, feeling its weight. 10.8 pounds, heavy for its class. The weapon's square receiver, its distinctive drum magazine mount, the Cut's compensator on the muzzle, all spoke of American manufacturing philosophy. Complex, expensive, wasteful by German standards. Werner had spent 2 decades refining the MP40, designing weapons that could be stamped from sheet metal and assembled by semi-skilled workers. Precision manufacturing was a luxury Germany could no longer afford, but this Thompson, this M1928A1, represented something different. It was a weapon built without apology, without compromise. Every component machined from solid steel, tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. A level of craftsmanship that would cripple German production if attempted at scale. The weapon had been recovered from a dead American paratrooper near Gafsa, Tunisia, 3 weeks earlier. Feldwebel Heinrich Krauss, who'd led the patrol that found it, had written in his after-action report words that still echoed in Werner's mind. The Americans fire these weapons like they cost nothing, continuous streams of bullets. We counted and stopped counting. Werner turned to his assistant. "Load it," he said quietly. "Full magazine. We test everything." The Heereswaffenamt, the Army Weapons Office, analyze the Thompson, determine its capabilities. Most importantly, understand why German soldiers across North Africa and soon Italy were reporting something they couldn't quite articulate, not fear, exactly, but a psychological pressure unlike anything experienced on the Eastern Front. The sensation of facing an enemy who possessed not just superior numbers, but limitless material abundance. The first magazine held 30 rounds of .45 ACP ammunition, also captured. Each cartridge was enormous by European standards, 11.4 mm in diameter, carrying a 230-grain bullet. The German 9mm Parabellum, by comparison, pushed a bullet less than half that weight. Physics dictated the outcome before a single round was fired. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Werner chambered the first round. The bolt moved with mechanical certainty, locking into battery with a solid clunk that suggested American confidence in materials. He raised the weapon to his shoulder, sighted on a pine block 20 meters downrange, and pressed the trigger. The Thompson roared, not the sharp crack of the MP40 or the mechanical stutter of the MG34, but a deep, percussive hammering that seemed to compress the air itself. The recoil was substantial, pushing the weapon upward with each shot, but controllable. 600 rounds per minute poured from the muzzle in a sustained burst that lasted perhaps 3 seconds. When Werner released the trigger, 20 rounds had been expended. The silence that followed felt profound. The pine block had disintegrated, not merely perforated, but shattered, splinters radiating outward in a cone of destruction. Behind it, the second block bore deep craters. A third block, positioned as backstop, showed penetration through 4 inches of solid wood. The engineers approached slowly, examining the damage with instruments and calipers. One man whistled low. Another made rapid calculations in a notebook. Werner said nothing, but his jaw tightened. They continued testing through the morning. Against sandbags, the .45 slugs punched through 2 layers and lodged deep in the third, creating wound channels far exceeding German 9mm performance. Against steel plate of the thickness used in vehicle armor, the results were less impressive. The Thompson was not an anti-material weapon. But against flesh, against bone, against the human targets that filled battlefields, the weapon's lethality was undeniable. At Werner's insistence, they brought out a pig carcass. Wehrmacht doctrine required tissue testing, however grim. The medical observer, Dr. Friedrich Hartmann, supervised the setup with clinical detachment. The pig, roughly the size and mass of a human torso, was positioned at 15 meters. Werner fired a 3-round burst center mass. The carcass convulsed violently. When Hartmann approached for examination, even he, veteran of countless ballistic tests, paused. The permanent wound cavity was massive, far exceeding what 9mm could achieve. The .45 bullets, heavy and slow-moving at 830 feet per second, had created hydrostatic shock waves that ruptured tissue well beyond the projectile path. Broken ribs radiated from the impact site. Internal organs were pulped. "Stopping power," Hartmann said quietly, scribbling in his logbook. "Immediate incapacitation. The Americans have built a weapon optimized for killing human beings at close range, with no consideration for anything else." Werner nodded slowly. This aligned with intelligence reports from North Africa. German troops described American infantry advancing behind walls of automatic fire, not aiming carefully, but suppressing entire areas with volume. Soldiers hit by Thompson, fire did not return to combat. They did not crawl to cover. They simply stopped, as if someone had flipped a switch. During the lunch break, the engineers gathered in a cold room, heated only by a small stove, black bread and ersatz coffee rations that reminded them daily of the war's grinding reality. Lieutenant Vogel, the youngest engineer, asked the question everyone was thinking. "Herr Oberingenieur, why would anyone build a weapon so expensive? The Americans could produce 3 MP40s for the cost of 1 Thompson." Werner chewed his bread thoughtfully. "Because they can afford it," he said finally. "And because their doctrine is different from ours, we build weapons for marksmanship, for disciplined fire control. Every bullet must count because we don't have enough. The Americans build for certainty. They don't worry about wasting ammunition because their factories produce more in a day than we manufacture in a month." He pulled out a folder, stamped Geheim, Secret. Inside were translated excerpts from captured American field manuals. "Listen to this," Werner said, "from their training doctrine. The Thompson submachine gun provides devastating automatic fire at close range. Soldiers are encouraged to fire continuously while advancing, suppressing enemy positions through volume rather than precision. They call it marching fire." The room fell silent, marching fire advancing while shooting, creating curtains of lead that made defensive fire untenable. It violated every principle of German infantry doctrine, which emphasized aimed shots from covered positions. Yet, if you had unlimited ammunition, if your logistics could sustain such profligacy, the tactic made brutal sense. Werner continued. They produce 47 billion rounds of small arms ammunition during this war. Billion. We struggle to produce 2.5 billion annually for all calibers combined. They fire more rounds in a single engagement than we allocate to a company for a week. Vogel shook his head. "It's madness. Wasteful." "Is it?" Werner asked. "Or have they simply solved a different problem? We ask, how do we make skilled soldiers more effective with limited resources? They ask, how do we make average soldiers overwhelmingly effective with abundant resources? Their Thompson gunner doesn't need to be a marksman. He just needs to point in the general direction and pull the trigger. The weapon does the rest." After lunch, they resumed with reliability testing. Werner had the Thompson soaked in water, then frozen overnight and test-fired the next morning. It functioned flawlessly. They buried it in sand, mimicking North African conditions, then fired it without cleaning. 2 stoppages in 300 rounds, both cleared within seconds. They dropped it from height onto concrete. The wooden stock cracked, but the weapon still fired. The engineers exchanged glances. The MP40 was reliable, certainly, but this American weapon seemed almost indestructible. Its over-engineered construction, so wasteful by German standards, meant tolerances that could absorb mud, sand, and abuse without failure. Hartmann conducted the next phase, comparative ballistic analysis. They fired the Thompson and MP40 side by side into calibrated gelatin blocks, measuring permanent and temporary wound cavities. The data was stark. The .45 ACP created permanent cavities, averaging 12 centimeters in diameter. The 9mm parabellum averaged 7 centimeters. In hydrostatic shock, the tissue disruption radiating from the bullet's path, the difference was even more pronounced. The Thompson's heavy, slow bullets transferred their energy into flesh rather than passing through cleanly. "This is not a military weapon," Hartmann said, typing his preliminary report. "This is an execution device that happens to be portable. Every hit is potentially lethal. Our 9mm requires precise shot placement. Their .45 kills through sheer trauma." Werner reviewed the chronograph data. Muzzle velocity, 820 feet per second for standard ball ammunition. Subsonic. No supersonic crack, which explained why captured soldiers reported hearing the Thompson's distinctive hammering rather than the sharp reports of high-velocity rifles. The subsonic velocity also meant the weapon was inherently suppressible, though the Americans seemed unconcerned with such refinements. Rate of fire, 600 to 700 rounds per minute for the M1928. A 1. Controllable with training, devastating when employed by units that had practiced. And according to intelligence, American soldiers trained extensively with the Thompson. Hundreds of rounds fired in basic training alone, an expenditure that would supply a German infantry company for weeks. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the proving ground, Werner assembled his findings for the official report. He chose his words carefully. The Heereswaffenamt wanted technical data, not philosophical conclusions. But the numbers told a story he could not ignore. Muzzle energy, 400 foot-pounds, nearly double the MP40's 240 foot-pounds. Effective range, 50 meters, admittedly shorter than the German weapon's 150 meters. But in the close combat of house clearing, night fighting, and jungle warfare, that 50-meter range was exactly what mattered. Magazine capacity, 20 or 30 rounds, comparable to German standards. But the Thompson could also accept 50 or 100-round drums, though intelligence suggested these were rarely used in combat due to weight and reliability issues. Weight, 4.9 kilograms loaded, significantly heavier than the MP40's 4 kilograms. Cost. The captured documents suggested $45 American per unit by early 1944, down from $200 in the 1920s. Still expensive by any measure, but the Americans were producing them at rates Germany could never match. By 1943, American factories had manufactured well over 1 million Thompsons. Germany had produced fewer than 1 million MP30s and MP40s combined since 1918. The report took shape. The American Thompson submachine gun represents a different philosophy of infantry weapons design, where German doctrine emphasizes marksmanship and ammunition conservation. American doctrine emphasizes volume of fire and certainty of effect. The weapon's .45 caliber ammunition creates wound channels, significantly exceeding our 9mm standard, resulting in immediate incapacitation. Reliability under adverse conditions is excellent. Rate of fire, while controllable, permits sustained automatic fire that can suppress defensive positions through sheer volume. Werner paused, pen hovering over the page. He wanted to add more, to explain what the numbers couldn't capture. The psychological impact of facing such weapons, the understanding that American industrial capacity made such extravagance possible, the recognition that Germany was fighting an enemy who could afford to waste resources on a scale that would bankrupt the Reich. But such observations had no place in a technical report. He continued with the cold language of engineering. Production capacity analysis suggests American Thompson output exceeds total German submachine gun production by significant margins. Captured intelligence indicates American forces deploy these weapons at company level in unprecedented numbers, not as specialist equipment, but as standard infantry arms for selected personnel. This distribution pattern, combined with reported ammunition expenditure rates, suggests logistics capability far exceeding Wehrmacht standards. The final line of his report, added after much consideration. Recommendation. Captured Thompson weapons should be evaluated for use by German forces where ammunition supply permits. However, widespread adoption is not feasible due to ammunition incompatibility and logistical constraints. The weapon primarily serves as intelligence regarding American industrial and tactical capabilities. As darkness fell over Kummersdorf, Werner stood at the window of his office, watching snow begin to fall across the proving ground. Somewhere to the west, American forces were consolidating their positions in North Africa. Soon they would push into Sicily, then Italy, and they would bring their Thompsons, their unlimited ammunition, their industrial abundance. German soldiers would face not just superior numbers, but a material disparity that no amount of tactical skill could overcome. The Thompson wasn't just a weapon, it was a statement. America had so much steel, so much manufacturing capacity, so much wealth, that it could afford to give each infantryman a submachine gun that cost more than a month's wages. It could afford to let those soldiers fire, thousands of rounds in training. It could afford tactics that any resource-limited military would consider insane. Werner locked his report in the safe. Tomorrow it would go to Berlin, where staff officers would read it and file it, and probably learn nothing from it, because the lesson the Thompson taught was one Germany could not afford to learn. That wars were won not by superior warriors, but by superior factories, not by tactical brilliance, but by overwhelming material abundance. The Thompson had done more than shatter pine blocks and tissue analogues in Kummersdorf's testing range. It had shattered the comfortable illusion that German engineering superiority could compensate for American industrial might. And that, Werner thought, was the most devastating impact of all. The reports from Kummersdorf arrived in Berlin on January 20th, 1943, stamped with priority classifications that ensured they reached the desks of senior Wehrmacht planners. But by then, the Thompson submachine gun was no longer an intelligence curiosity. It was a battlefield reality that German soldiers were confronting daily across North Africa and soon across the Mediterranean. Oberst Friedrich Krantz, chief of the Heereswaffenamt's small arms section, read Werner's technical analysis with growing unease. The numbers were damning enough: double the muzzle energy, devastating wound ballistics, production rates that dwarfed German capacity. But it was the reports from frontline units that truly disturbed him. These were not technical documents written in the sterile language of engineering. These were the desperate observations of men who had faced the Thompson in combat and survived to describe it. From Tunisia, January 1943. The Americans attacked our positions at Kasserine with infantry supported by armor. When they dismounted from their vehicles, we estimated every third soldier carried the automatic gun. They did not advance with fire discipline. They simply walked forward, firing continuously. Our machine gun teams could not maintain positions under such volume. It was like facing rain made of lead. From Sicily, July 1943. In the village fighting at Gela, American Rangers cleared houses with methods we had not encountered. They would fire entire magazines through walls before entering rooms, 30 rounds through plaster and wood in 5 seconds. Our soldiers waiting in ambush positions were cut down before they could return fire. The sound alone was disorienting, a continuous hammering that made coherent thought impossible. From Salerno, September 1943. The American paratroopers carry these weapons almost exclusively. In night combat, the muzzle flash and distinctive report created confusion among our troops. We could not determine the size of attacking forces because the volume of fire suggested company strength, when in reality it was a single platoon. Our doctrine calls for counting weapons to estimate enemy numbers. This method fails against Americans. Krantz assembled these reports into a briefing for Generaloberst Heinrich von Stülpnagel, who oversaw German infantry doctrine development. The meeting took place in a bunker beneath the Bendler Block, Berlin's military administrative complex, on a grey February morning as Allied bombers droned overhead. The Thompson problem, Krantz began, spreading photographs across the conference table, is not primarily technical. It is doctrinal and psychological. The Americans have built tactics around unlimited automatic firepower that our soldiers cannot match. Von Stülpnagel studied the images. American paratroopers boarding aircraft, Thompsons slung across their chests. Marines wading ashore at Guadalcanal, weapons held high above the surf. Rangers posing with captured German bunkers, drums of empty brass casings piled beside them. Every photograph showed the same thing. Confidence born of material abundance. Our intelligence estimates American small arms ammunition production at 47 billion rounds for the duration of the war. Krantz continued. This is 18 times our annual capacity. A single American infantry division consumes more ammunition monthly than we allocate to an entire army group. They have built a military that does not count bullets. That psychological freedom translates directly into tactical aggression. Von Stuhlpnagel leaned back, fingers steepled. You're saying we cannot replicate their tactics because we lack their resources. Precisely, Herr General. But more than that, our soldiers face an enemy who fights without the constraints we consider fundamental to warfare. German doctrine teaches fire discipline, conserve ammunition, make every shot count. The Americans teach the opposite, suppress everything, advance behind walls of fire, reload, and repeat. When our men encounter this, it violates their understanding of how infantry combat works. The general pulled out a field report from his own briefcase. This is from General Major Paul Conrath, commander of the Hermann Goering Division in Sicily. He writes, American infantry tactics appear crude and wasteful until one experiences them under fire. Then their logic becomes clear. They accept that 95% of rounds fired will miss. They don't care. The remaining 5%, multiplied by thousands of rounds, creates casualty rates our formations cannot sustain. More critically, the psychological pressure of continuous automatic fire breaks unit cohesion before we can employ our superior marksmanship. Krantz nodded. The Thompson embodies this philosophy perfectly. It is inaccurate beyond 50 meters. It is heavy. It consumes ammunition voraciously. By our standards, it is a flawed weapon. But American standards are different. They have optimized for close combat lethality and psychological impact, accepting all other drawbacks as irrelevant. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The briefing continued with technical comparisons. The MP40, Germany's standard submachine gun, fired the 9mm Parabellum at a rate of 500 rounds per minute from 32-round magazines. It weighed 4 kilograms empty, could be produced for approximately 30 Reichsmarks, and was issued primarily to squad leaders, vehicle crews, and paratroopers. Total production: approximately 910,000 units, from 1940 through 1945. The Thompson, by contrast, fired the .45 ACP at 600 to 700 rounds per minute from 20 or 30-round magazines, occasionally 50-round drums. It weighed 4.9 kilograms empty, cost $45 American by 1944, and was distributed far more widely. American production exceeded 1.7 million units, with an additional 600,000 M3 grease guns, supplementing Thompson numbers. But raw statistics missed the crucial difference. Ammunition. A German infantry regiment in 1943 received approximately 50,000 rounds of small arms ammunition weekly. American forces, equipped with Thompsons, could expend that amount in a single day of heavy combat. The Wehrmacht's entire logistical structure was designed around ammunition scarcity. The U.S. Army's structure assumed ammunition abundance. This creates a tactical asymmetry we cannot overcome, Krantz concluded. When our soldiers engage Americans at range, our Kar-98s give us an advantage, 500-meter accuracy versus 50-meter submachine guns. But Americans avoid such engagements. They use armor and artillery to close distance, then assault with automatic weapons at ranges where our rifles cannot compete. In villages, forests, and rubble, the terrain that defines the Italian campaign, the Thompson dominates. Von Stuhlpnagel stood, walking to a map of Italy that covered one wall. American forces had landed at Salerno weeks earlier and were pushing north toward Rome. The terrain was mountainous, perfect for defense. German forces held strong positions in the Gustav Line, anchored by Monte Cassino. Traditional military wisdom suggested defenders held overwhelming advantages in such country. Yet our casualty rates are unsustainable, the general said quietly. American units attack fortified positions that should be impregnable and succeed through sheer violence of action. Your analysis suggests the Thompson is a significant factor in this success. Not the weapon alone, Herr General. The entire system, weapon, ammunition, logistics, training, and doctrine working in concert. An American paratrooper trains with his Thompson until manipulation is instinctive. He fires hundreds of rounds in qualification. He knows that in combat, resupply is assured. This confidence allows aggression our soldiers cannot match. Our men are brave, well-trained, superior marksmen, but they fight with one eye always on the ammunition counter, knowing that excessive fire today means no ammunition tomorrow. The meeting concluded with von Stueltnagel's directive. German troops were authorized to use captured Thompson weapons where ammunition could be sourced. Reports from Italy indicated some success with this policy. A Fallschirmjäger unit defending Monte Cassino had integrated captured Thompsons into their defensive positions, using American ammunition stocks found in overrun supply dumps. Their after-action report noted, "The psychological effect on attacking Americans of hearing their own weapons used against them was notable." However, ammunition supply remains the limiting factor. After initial stocks were exhausted, the weapons became decorative. More significantly, von Stueltnagel ordered accelerated distribution of German submachine guns, frontline units. If the Wehrmacht could not match American ammunition expenditure, it could at least increase the proportion of automatic weapons in infantry squads. But production constraints meant this remained aspirational. In 1943, Germany manufactured approximately 400,000 submachine guns of all types. America produced well over 1 million Thompsons alone in that same year. The Italian campaign became the Thompson's proving ground and the Wehrmacht's education in American firepower philosophy. At Anzio, from January to May 1944, German forces surrounded an Allied beachhead and attempted to push the invasion force back into the sea. The fighting devolved into static, World War I-style trench warfare conditions that should have favored German defensive doctrine. Instead, American and British forces held, then eventually broke out. The after-action reports from German units engaged at Anzio consistently mentioned the Thompson's impact. One account from a soldier in the 3rd Panzer Grenadier Division described a night counterattack on February 16th. "We infiltrated to within 30 meters of American positions before being detected. When they opened fire, I thought we faced an entire company. The automatic weapons fire was overwhelming, not measured bursts but continuous streams. Half our assault wave was down in seconds. We learned later we had attacked a single reinforced platoon. The volume of fire made accurate casualty assessment impossible." The Anzio fighting revealed another dimension of the Thompson's effectiveness: its sound. German veterans consistently described being able to identify American positions by the weapon's distinctive report. The deep, hammering cadence of .45 rounds at 600 per minute created an acoustic signature unlike any other battlefield weapon. The psychological impact was significant. German soldiers advancing under artillery fire had learned to estimate shell calibers by sound, predicting danger zones. The Thompson's unmistakable voice announced American presence with authority that transcended its actual numbers. In May 1944, Allied forces finally broke through the Gustav Line and advanced on Rome. The Monte Cassino monastery, pulverized by repeated bombing and artillery, fell to Polish troops on May 18th. American forces pushed up the Liri Valley, employing combined arms tactics that Wehrmacht defenders found increasingly difficult to counter. German after-action reports from this period show a subtle shift in language, from confident assessments of enemy capabilities to grudging acknowledgement of material inferiority. A report from Major Hans-Georg Schmidt, commanding a battalion of the 1st Parachute Division, captured this evolution. The American infantry's tactics appear simplistic until one must defend against them. They advance behind artillery barrages that pulverize defensive positions. When the barrage lifts, their infantry is already at close range, automatic weapons firing continuously. Our doctrine assumes time to reoccupy fighting positions after bombardment ceases. Against Americans, that time does not exist. They accept casualties from their own artillery to maintain momentum. Their Thompson gunners fire from the hip while moving inaccurate, but psychologically devastating. Our riflemen, trained for aimed shots, struggle to engage targets that fire while advancing. Schmidt's report included casualty figures that told their own story. In a typical engagement, his battalion suffered 35% casualties, not from American marksmanship, but from volume of fire. Medical reports indicated most wounds came from .45 caliber rounds at ranges under 50 meters. The permanent wound channels were catastrophic. Soldiers hit in the torso rarely survived to reach medical stations. Even limb wounds, which German 9mm could inflict without permanent disability, resulted in shattered bones requiring amputation. The ammunition disparity manifested in unexpected ways. German defenders learned to estimate American unit strength not by visual identification, but by listening to the volume and duration of automatic fire during engagements. A German intelligence officer noted in June 1944, "Traditional methods of estimating enemy forces prove unreliable against Americans. A single American squad can sustain fire equivalent to a German platoon due to prevalence of automatic weapons and unlimited ammunition. This leads to overestimation of enemy numbers and inappropriate defensive responses." By summer of 1944, American forces were preparing for Operation Dragoon, the invasion of southern France. Wehrmacht units that had faced Thompsons in Italy were redeployed to France, bringing hard-won knowledge of American tactics. Their warnings to units fresh from garrison duty were consistent. Do not underestimate American infantry. Their individual marksmanship is inferior to ours. Their tactics appear crude, but their automatic weapons and unlimited ammunition create combat conditions unlike the Eastern Front. Prepare for continuous fire at close range. Conserve ammunition. Choose defensive positions that deny them ability to close distance. These warnings proved prophetic. When Allied forces landed in Normandy on June 6, 1944, German defenders encountered the same Thompson-equipped paratroopers and rangers who had fought through North Africa and Italy. The 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions dropped behind German lines carrying M1A1 Thompsons distributed to squad leaders and scouts. Rangers assaulting Pointe du Hoc brought Thompsons specifically for bunker clearing. The bocage country of Normandy, a landscape of small fields divided by thick hedgerows, became the Thompsons' ideal environment. Visibility was limited. Engagement ranges rarely exceeded 50 meters. Traditional rifle advantages disappeared. The American preference for close combat, supported by unlimited ammunition expenditure, proved decisive in the grinding attritional warfare that characterized the Normandy breakout. A German report from the 352nd Infantry Division, defending near Saint-Lô in July, described the new reality. American tactics in bocage terrain follow consistent patterns. Artillery and tank fire suppress a hedgerow. Infantry approaches using covered routes. At 10 to 20 meters, they assault with automatic weapons, firing continuously while moving. Our defensive doctrine assumes ability to deliver aimed fire during assault phases. Against Americans, visibility and time to aim are denied by smoke, suppressive fire, and speed of assault. The Thompson weapon allows them to fire effectively while moving, which our rifles cannot match. The casualty statistics from Normandy told the story in numbers. German units, engaged in bocage fighting, suffered casualty rates approaching 50% within weeks. American casualties were also heavy, but the Wehrmacht had no replacement system capable of matching American reinforcement rates. Each engagement depleted German units faster than they could be reconstituted. The Thompson, combined with American artillery superiority and air dominance, created a grinding mechanism that consumed Wehrmacht formations. As American forces broke out from Normandy in August and raced across France, German defensive strategy shifted toward urban fighting. Cities like Metz, Aachen, and later in the war, German cities themselves, offered terrain where defenders traditionally held advantages. But the Thompson had been designed for exactly such environments. Its origins as a trench broom for World War I urban warfare made it ideal for house-to-house combat. The Battle of Aachen, October 1944, demonstrated the Thompson's dominance in urban terrain. American forces needed 3 weeks to clear a city German forces believed could hold for months. The fighting was brutal, building by building, room by room. German after-action reports describe American room-clearing techniques that maximized the Thompson's strengths. Americans do not enter rooms through doors. They breach walls with explosives or tank fire. Before entering, they fire automatic weapons through the breach 30 rounds in 5 seconds into empty space. Only then do they enter. This technique makes ambush positions untenable. Our soldiers learned to evacuate rooms at the first breach, rather than remain and be killed. The psychological toll of defending against such tactics appeared in the post-war interviews with German veterans. Many described the Thompson's sound as more memorable than visual encounters with the weapon. The deep hammering, the sheer volume, the impression of limitless firepower, these created a sense of material hopelessness that transcended the weapon's actual capabilities. Franz Müller, a Gefreiter who fought in Italy and Germany, described it in a 1953 interview. "You would hear the Thompsons at night, that distinctive sound, like a hammer striking an anvil, rapid but heavy. You knew Americans were near. You knew they had so much ammunition they could fire for hours. We had perhaps 80 rounds for our rifles. They had thousands. This knowledge, this certainty that they could waste ammunition while we hoarded it, affected decisions. Do I fire at a shadow and risk running out of ammunition? Or do I wait for a certain target and risk being suppressed by their fire?" They never faced such choices. The Battle of the Bulge, December 1944 through January 1945, represented Germany's last major offensive in the West. Initial success came partly from achieving surprise and concentrating forces. But as American units recovered and counterattacked, familiar patterns emerged. The 101st Airborne, defending Bastogne while surrounded, held positions where Thompsons provided final protective fire. German attacks funneled by terrain met concentrated automatic weapons, fire that defensive doctrine could not overcome. Joseph Piper's Kampfgruppe Piper, spearheading the German offensive, encountered Thompson-equipped infantry at numerous key points. Piper's post-war testimony at war crimes trials included observations about American defensive capabilities. "When we achieved surprise, we advanced. When Americans established defensive positions, our infantry could not dislodge them without unsustainable casualties. Their automatic weapons created interlocking fields of fire. Our doctrine called for suppressive fire and maneuver, but we could not suppress forces that had 10 times our ammunition expenditure. They simply fired through our suppression attempts." By early 1945, German forces were in full retreat on all fronts. The Rhine River, traditional, defensive barrier, was breached in March at Remagen when American forces captured the Ludendorff Bridge intact. Engineers and infantry storming across under fire carried Thompsons almost exclusively, laying down suppressive fire that prevented German demolition attempts. The volume of fire from individual soldiers astounded German defenders accustomed to careful, aimed shooting. As American forces crossed into Germany proper, the Thompson's psychological impact reached its peak. German defenders, increasingly composed of Volkssturm militia, old men and boys with minimal training, faced a weapon and tactical system that transcended their preparation. The Thompson's appearance in American hands had become synonymous with defeat, with overwhelming material superiority, with the inevitability of Germany's collapse. The final statistics, compiled after the war, revealed the scale of American submachine gun production and deployment. Total Thompson production, approximately 1.7 million units. M3 production, 600,000 units. Total, 2.3 million submachine guns. Germany, by contrast, produced approximately 1.4 million submachine guns of all types, from 1918 through 1945. In 3 years, America had outproduced Germany's entire World War II submachine gun output and exceeded total German production over nearly 3 decades. Ammunition production numbers were even more stark. American 45 ACP production is difficult to isolate from total small arms ammunition, but estimates suggest sufficient quantities to support millions of Thompsons and M1911 pistols without shortage reported at any point. Germany's entire small arms ammunition production peaked at 2.5 billion rounds annually, less than 6% of American production. The cost differential, initially seen as the Thompson's fatal flaw, proved irrelevant in the face of American industrial capacity. Yes, Thompsons cost $45 each by 1944, expensive by German standards. But American factories produced them alongside 300,000 military aircraft, 86,000 tanks, 2.6 million trucks, and countless other weapons. The Thompson was a rounding error in the arsenal of democracy's output. German ordnance officers studying the Thompson in the war's aftermath reached conclusions that vindicated Werner's initial observations from Kummersdorf. The weapon itself was overbuilt, overweight, and overcomplicated by German engineering standards. But these characteristics reflected American strategic priorities: reliability over weight, certainty over elegance, abundance over efficiency. Every decision that made the Thompson expensive, heavy, and complex also made it devastatingly effective in the hands of trained soldiers backed by limitless logistics. The captured German documents that survived the war reveal a consistent theme in technical analyses of the Thompson: grudging respect mixed with incomprehension. The economic wastefulness violated every principle of resource-limited manufacturing, yet they could not deny the results. In combat after combat, theatre after theatre, American forces employing the Thompson achieved tactical successes that German doctrine said should be impossible. One final report deserves mention. In April 1945, as Soviet forces encircled Berlin and American forces advanced through southern Germany, a Wehrmacht ordnance team at Kummersdorf prepared to evacuate their facility. Among the documents they attempted to destroy were test records on captured Allied weapons. Soviet forces overran the site before complete destruction was achieved. In the recovered documents, Western historians later found Werner's original Thompson analysis from January 1943. Someone, perhaps Werner himself, had also added a handwritten note in the margin. "We analyzed this weapon, believing it represented American engineering capability. We were wrong. It represents American industrial philosophy, the belief that overwhelming material abundance solves military problems. Against such thinking, our tactical excellence is insufficient. The Thompson does not win battles. American factories win battles. This weapon is merely their messenger." Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.